Just give me in a minute or so your elevator pitch on why you want to be governor of Ohio and why you want people to break from the major party candidates and vote for you.
Thank you. Yes, again, my name's Constance Gadell-Newton, and I'm running for governor as a Green Party candidate. And we are running on a platform of environmental justice and social justice, nonviolence and diversity. And we don't take corporate donations. We really just want to make sure that we're representing the people's interests. So we don't take money from big oil and gas or the big pharmaceutical companies. We really are just trying to create our platform based on what we hear from Ohioans. So we're really here to represent the people's issues.
Now, your website lists several areas, and you just did, as a matter of fact, and that you're very concerned about: grassroots democracy, economy, taxation and public investment, labor and employment, a whole list of these sort of things. One of these things, though, that kind of relates to the campaign that's going on right now in the major party candidates is health care. And both major party candidates say they support Medicaid expansion, though Mike DeWine, the Republican, wants to make some changes in it. You have said you support single-payer universal health care,
yes,
which some people call Medicare for all. How would you do anything with that, considering that's a federal policy?
Thank you. Yes, we are in support of Medicare for all. So we would support a Medicaid expansion, but healthcare coverage is complex, so more is needed. Medicare for all is something that would be simple to administer. It would be very efficient and have lots of cost savings for the people of Ohio. And there is a bill pending in the State House. It's been introduced in the State House for Medicare for all. So I would be hoping that our politicians next year will be moving that forward.
And with that, would that also give you the opportunity to deal with the protections for people with pre-existing conditions, another issue that's been pretty big for voters?
Yeah, that is essential. And actually, I am also a person with a pre-existing condition. As a self-employed attorney, it has been incredibly difficult to get adequate health care coverage. So, as someone with diabetes, I have a vested interest, that is different than I think the vested interest that the other politicians have when they deal with this.
Let me ask you a little bit about taxes. Your website talks about investing in social infrastructure, public transportation, clean energy, and broadband, also overhauling the tax policy to end corporate welfare, which you spoke to just a minute ago, and give comprehensive relief to working people, and restoring cuts to local governments. All these things sound expensive, and given the attitude of the legislature of late, they also seem unlikely.
Yes, I understand. I know that oftentimes the Green Party platform is looked at as very idealistic, and so it's always been a question as we've been researching our platform. We know the question is, how are you going to pay for it? And what I would say is, for starters, there's so much fraud, waste, and abuse in our system that if we can stop the bleeding, so to speak, of that money that is being given away to the top CEOs, income, and basically, I think there's a lot of cost savings, and that our budgetary concerns are about priorities. We need to put the priorities where the people are. We need to make sure that Ohioans have their basic needs met for healthcare, especially for healthcare, because it's so basic. So we really want to prioritize that. We want to prioritize education and making sure that Ohioans have the basics first, that we can build from there.
You also talk on your website about the economy, a $15 an hour minimum wage, strengthening labor unions, mandatory paid parental leave, and protecting employees from exploitative practices. But also you talk about creating a policy and a climate that's favorable to small businesses. How do you do both those things? They seem like they're at cross purposes here.
Well, I would say that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all solution for how we treat various different businesses. We do want to encourage small, local, and green businesses, so locally owned businesses that really center the wealth in Ohio. So we want to have policies that promote local businesses.
But the regulations, you're talking about putting some regulations on businesses, but also freeing businesses from regulations. How do you do both those things?
Well, right now, a lot of the largest corporations from out of state are coming, and they get a lot of tax abatements. So they're not being held accountable to the public good in the same way that even smaller businesses are. So right now, big corporations get the advantage there.
Now let's turn to environmental issues, which the Green parties are largely associated with, though you make it clear that you are not a single issue party, that you have all these other issues that you're talking about. Both the major party candidates are saying that they support fracking in eastern Ohio. You have called for an immediate moratorium on fracking. How would you do that when there's so much economy and so much economic benefit to eastern Ohio tied up with fracking?
Right. So we are an environmentalist party, but we also care about workers and the economy. So I would just say that so often these interests are pitted against each other. We do stand for an immediate moratorium on fracking because the people of Ohio have reached out and voiced their concerns about the water quality and the environment in Ohio. So we need to have, I believe, a rapid transition to green energy in Ohio. And for displaced workers, we'd like to have a super fund for workers to ensure that they have training and that they're able to move forward from that change. We'd like to see worker-owned energy cooperatives and manufacturing, and I believe that Ohio can really be a leader in green energy, and that's a product as far as the manufacturing and the energy itself that can drive wealth in Ohio, and that can be the people's wealth.
And I imagine that you're also supportive of green energy standards in Ohio. That's kind of something that's been tossed around for a while, yes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you, too, about clean water. You've said that's a priority. There have been some struggles in Ohio with some farming communities who are very concerned about rules on runoff that relate specifically to Lake Erie algal blooms. So what do you do about that to try to resolve some of those differences?
Thank you. I would just like to highlight my running mate in this race, Brett Joseph. He is a professor and he works in sustainable agriculture. So he's very in touch with the farming community and environmental concerns. So our feeling is that we can work with farmers to ensure that we are coming up with policies that make sense for the environment and for farmers. So we know that there's a lot of balancing of interests that has to go on when you're governor of a state, and when we're representing so many people. We really seek to represent all Ohioans. So we want to safeguard our water and at the same time ensure that we have prosperity and livelihoods for farmers and workers in Ohio.
You talk on your website about advancing common sense solutions to gun violence that you say has caused too many senseless deaths in Ohio and elsewhere. You also, though, want to protect Second Amendment rights of Ohioans. You're opposed to stand your ground, concealed carry reciprocity. Once again, you'd be dealing with a legislature that has expanded gun rights and doesn't seem to be interested in pulling back on those, even though Governor Kasich has proposed some of the things that you're talking about here. So what would you do? Right.
Well, I think that's another area where we have to balance interests and look at the interests of all Ohioans. So I think that, a lot of school children and parents have called out, please make our schools safer. So I do think that certain regulation would be beneficial, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the citizens of Ohio are not unduly punished for having firearms that are legal and safely carried. So one thing that I'm proposing is a diversion program for nonviolent gun possession offenses. So that way they can still be held accountable, but they don't need to continue to have the stigma of a criminal record for a technical violation like concealed carry or having it in your car.
Let me ask you about that whole idea of criminal justice reform. Another thing you talk about on the website, and actually your colleague or counterpart in the other minor party, Travis Irvine, has said that criminal justice reform is very important. What does that look like to you?
Well, to me, I think that we have to look at a lot of historical underpinnings. So, we have a history of moving from slavery to black codes and Jim Crow law. And I think that part of this history has really resulted in mass incarceration in Ohio and in the United States. We have in the United States the highest percentage of citizens who are incarcerated. And in the land of the free, that's just really not acceptable. So we need to move towards restorative justice practices and finding alternatives and prevention. So one thing that we promote is community-based anti-violence programming, mediation, and alternative dispute resolution.
Another thing that you and Travis Irvine, the Libertarian candidate, also agree on that differs from the major party candidates is that you both support legalization of marijuana. What would that look like for you, and what would you do? Would there be a tax benefit to the state for that?
Yeah, so currently medical cannabis has passed, but the implementation has been very poor. So one of the first things that we would want to do is work on the implementation of medical marijuana to make sure that that's accessible to patients. Then we also do support decriminalization and legalization of recreational marijuana, and I do think that that could have an amazing tax benefit for the state of Ohio. That's something that could support our schools and our healthcare in Ohio. We have so many needs here locally that that's something that could really help.
Now let me ask you just some final questions about your campaign in general. Some people might say a minor party candidate with no previous elected official experience is not capable of leading a state of 11.5 million people with a $32 billion budget and one of the deadliest opioid epidemics in the nation. What's your argument back to people who would say that?
Yeah, I hear you. So I would just say that I am an attorney. I have started my own business, and I've run a political party for almost the past 10 years. And I have a lot of experience working with people and seeing how our policies of our state affect them in their daily lives. I would also just say that people are calling for something new. They want an end to career politicians who have conflicts of interest with big corporations, and I can bring that to them. I also, plan on using a wealth of experts as I staff the departments of our state with people who are actually really qualified in those areas. I don't have the same conflicts of interest as a lot of other politicians. I'll be basing my decisions not on their political party, but on their experience, qualifications, and their willingness to do a good job for the people of Ohio. So I have a great team behind me, and I would just say that we really need to look to young people for leadership, especially since it is the older politicians with more experience who have gotten us to where we are today. So you see so many attacks between the two major candidates, blaming the other for our societal problems. I think it's time for a new generation of leadership.
Now, Green Party candidates are often seen as spoilers for Democratic candidates. How would it affect you if the percentage of people who vote for you, Richard Cordray doesn't win by that same percentage?
Well, I know that there is the spoiler argument. There's the fear of that. I would just say that we get our votes from across the board, and we work really hard for we work hard for our voter base, and we've been growing. So we are hopeful that we will get what we need to maintain our ballot access. And that is the big question for us in this election. Will we maintain our ballot access so that we can continue to represent these interests and the interests of the people of Ohio?
And that was my final question. The whole idea of getting that 3% threshold. If you get 3% in this election, then you do ensure your ballot access for the next 4 years. Is this campaign more about getting that 3%, or is it about winning the governor's office?
Well, of course, we're hopeful, and I could win this election with 34% of the popular vote in a three-way race and 26% in a four-way race, and it is a four-way race at this point. So I would just say that, as you're voting, don't rule it out that something surprising could happen, or that someone new could win the election. So I'd encourage people to vote their conscience and vote for what really speaks to them instead of trying to pick the winner.
And it would be historically amazing, though, because, Bob Fitrakis, who is a colleague of yours, as a matter of fact, got the 3% threshold there in 2014, but the Green Party candidates weren't able to reach that number in 2010 or 2006.
So this is a really crucial year for us to maintain our party status because of that. So every governor's or presidential election, if you get the 3%, you're allowed to continue only for 4 years. So this is a very crucial race for us. And we are already planning ahead towards 2020 in the hopes that we will make that threshold and are recruiting candidates for 2020. And we're looking forward to moving forward and growing and continuing.